Coming off of Dead Space 2, which I enjoyed a lot, I was kind of feeling mixed going into Dead Space 3. I've seen across the internet people say that this is the worst in the franchise, while other people I've talked to have said it's their favorite. Going into this, I didn't know why the opinions were so divided surrounding this game, but simply because of that, I had to give this game a shot. And after finishing my playthrough, I understand why this game gets the hate it does.
Isaac, I know you're there. Come on, pick up the phone. Fine. Look, I just called to say I'm moving on. I have to. Just take care of yourself, okay?
If you have played a Dead Space game before, then you know exactly what to expect when starting this game up. You're still playing in a third-person perspective, walking around and killing necromorphs. All of that is still there. But outside of that, there were some key changes that worked, but I just didn't like it all. Let's start off with the most obvious aspect, the action. Unlike the previous games that were focused on survival horror, Dead Space 3 takes a hard left turn and completely flips the script, focusing more on action survival instead. This is made apparent right from the beginning as you're met with a set piece that was more action-oriented than anything we had seen in the previous two entries. Right from that moment, I knew I would be in for a long playthrough. What's crazy is that I enjoyed the action, but I don't think it fit this type of game. Everything you do is always exciting and impactful, but it's not always fun. My biggest gripe with the action is that you as a character still move slow. Moving slow and steady has always been a thing in Dead Space, and that's completely okay here. But with everything else moving fast, it makes the gameplay a chore. This is felt the most during the encounters with the necromorphs on the halfway point and forward. So many times I would be trying to make my way through an area and encounter necromorphs in a room, normal stuff. But as you're fighting these things, you're going to want to create some distance between you and them, because getting in close usually is never a good idea. However, as I would try to run away, the enemies would actually catch me from behind, and this happened over and over and over. Why, you might ask? Because the enemies themselves were faster than before. In the previous two games, you can never gain a humongous distance from the enemies, but you didn't always get caught if you turned away and ran the other direction. But this time, that was never an option. Now, I know what you might be thinking. Bro, just use the stasis module and keep them stuck in place. And I did that, but remember, you only get so many charges of those, so you can't just spam them over and over because you'll eventually run out. Even if you upgrade the charges, it's still not enough. So imagine how mad I was when the devs decided to bring back the one enemy type I was hoping wouldn't show up, the chickens. If you've seen my Dead Space 2 review, then you know that these necromorphs are the absolute bane of my existence. They run around like chickens extremely fast. Even if you have good reaction time, you're probably going to get hit by these things a lot. Combine them with the slow movement, and I was in hell. To make things worse, the gun system was changed too. In Dead Space 2, you were given the option to hold 4 guns from the start, with you being able to buy them from the store. In this game, you were reduced to only 2 weapon slots, and you had to unlock the guns by crafting them inside a workbench, which was also changed. Staying on the topic of guns, I thought this hindered the experience so much. For a game that is supposed to be more action focused, how can you take away additional firepower for the player? Being able to seamlessly swap in between 4 weapons would have aligned perfectly with how this game was trying to be. It made the game harder for literally no reason. I do understand that you could play this game co-op, so maybe that's why this feature was changed, but playing this years later after release, it only appears as something that hurts a player going through this for the first time. I mentioned the workbench, and this change might have hurt the most. I thought the entire store system in the first 2 games was absolutely perfect. Being able to find a store, buy materials, manage your inventory, and sell your current rare materials was so easy to understand. Then if you wanted to upgrade your gun, suit, or stasis, you would find a workbench to do that. Instead, this game attempts to merge both the store and workbench together, and does a poor job of doing so. When using the workbench, you're greeted with a host of new changes. You're not able to craft your own weapon with parts that you find as you progress through the game, find blueprints and make weapons from those, add attachments to different parts of your weapon, and then the store is just thrown in there as well. On paper, that sounds great, right? Well, when using it, it's just okay. The concept of creating your own weapon is cool, but I don't think it was necessary. Dead Space worked perfectly fine just finding weapons as you progressed or having a select number available in the store. When crafting your own weapons, it's like the game wanted to dip its toe into RPG territory, but wouldn't take the full leap. Now, I'm one of those players that always prefers to give the player more choice, but this time I didn't want it. I think what made the weapon crafting and upgrade system worse is that you didn't find enough materials to actually craft the really strong blueprints that were available or make a gun that was borderline OP, which is always the goal. Too many times I had to choose between one thing or the other with the materials, when if we got more of them, I could make a gun I wanted on top of getting more stuff like ammo or health packs. I do appreciate that the game didn't give you too many materials, because then you would have an overabundance of items or ammo, and the conservation aspect would never be a thing. But when you implement new systems and then you have to compromise on what you want to do thanks to those new systems, it just sucks. Now let's flip this on its head. Let's say that you do make your desired weapon or craft something that's just insane. screen. You then have to choose between a gun that you may already like thanks to only having 2 weapon slots available. It just makes no sense. This leads me right into the upgrade circuits. Instead of having power nodes, these were changed to be circuits that would still be inside blue wall cabinets, but this mechanic was changed too. When finding these, they would have the upgrade on the circuit, which I didn't like. So let's say you were walking around and found one of these things, right? The upgrades on the circuit might be +2 damage, -1 rate of fire, which seems cool on the surface, but it's really not. I loved being able to find a power node and then use that towards whatever gun I wanted and place on a particular path, instead of being forced into a certain upgrade. Now you could keep all these circuits and only apply the ones that you wanted, but being able to choose what you wanted to upgrade and how you wanted to do it was so much better than whatever this system was. But it gets worse, as there's only 8 possible upgrade slots on each weapon, because the weapons have an upper and lower tool that is comprised of 4 slots each. In comparison, the other Dead Space games gave you way more slots to upgrade different features, which was really convenient. I just thought the upgrade system was perfectly fine the way it was before, and it's a bit odd that this game gives the player more freedom when it comes to crafting weapons and attachments, but then limits them in regards to the actual upgrades for those particular weapons. It makes no sense. But when you combine all those aspects together, you might see why I didn't vibe with this gameplay as much as I did the other two. Moving forward, I thought there was a bit too many puzzles. There's always been puzzles in Dead Space, but I think this game overdid it a bit. The puzzles were creative, having you use stasis to turn dials and move objects to different places, but I thought it just threw off the pacing. I'll avoid spoilers, but towards the end of the game you're going to solve a puzzle using stasis and sound, which I thought was pretty cool at first, but then you have to battle a whole bunch of enemies, as expected, only to open these doors with these puzzles on them again and again and again. It just got annoying. Take this and apply it across the game and you'll see how tedious these things can get. Whenever I saw a puzzle, I just sighed. Lastly, what I didn't like was the spawns of the necromorphs. As I've already mentioned, you can't run away from the enemies like before. The rooms where these encounters usually happen are in small spaces. It's almost like a 4-walled room with enough windows to spawn at least a couple necromorphs. But me being me, I tried to combat this by using the force gun, which took me forever to craft, and clearing out a path. Unfortunately, that was only a temporary fix, as I still ended up getting stuck on the enemies as I tried moving past them, or they would get up really fast after I used one of the force gun bullets. Then as you would defeat the enemies, more would spawn. And then more, and then more. Yeah, there's sections of the game where infinite enemies would spawn, which is a huge disappointment. Thankfully there isn't too many, but that just makes everything unnecessarily difficult. When looking at all these issues, maybe my approach to the gameplay was off, or I misunderstood a mechanic, but to say that I had issues with it would be an understatement. But even with all of these critiques, the gameplay is still fun at its core. As I said already, if you played Dead Space before, then what you do is still the same, so the gameplay is enjoyable to a degree. Running around killing necromorphs never gets old. It doesn't matter where you're killing them, you see one, it's gotta go. It could be their design or mannerisms, but just seeing these things makes me want to get rid of them immediately. In regards to the necromorphs themselves, I thought the variety of ones we faced was done pretty well. You're not facing the same types of enemies over and over, but instead face a handful of them in different types of areas and moments. Like I said before, I still hate the chickens, but the other enemies were all pretty cool. Even though the plasma cutter works on all of them, it doesn't tear through everything with ease. You have to figure out what your gun can do and then how to use that on each enemy, adding some strategy to the combat. Having to think in the middle of battle could be seen as a bad thing since this game is supposed to be fast paced, but I didn't mind. If anything, it let me mentally prepare for what was coming because I did die frequently during my playthrough. If there was one thing I was impressed by, it was the boss fights. Honestly, I didn't think this game was going to have them at all because we didn't get any for a handful of chapters. But just like the last game, these are pretty fun. Unlike the normal encounters, these took place in a large open area where you could easily run around and evade the enemy attacks. And new to this game was the ability to roll, which made the evasion even easier. So fighting these bosses was never annoying and served as a nice challenge that spiced things up during the various points throughout the game. The actual mechanics to these fights aren't hard to understand, as they compromise to just shooting the tentacles or weak spots that reveal themselves after a certain amount of time. Getting to that point where they are revealed is the tricky part though, but that's what makes it fun. One thing I asked for in my Dead Space 2 review was to be surrounded by more humans. In particular, I asked for a companion that would be with you during the actual combat. We didn't get quite that, but what we did get is a bigger cast of characters this time around. Over the course of the game, you never have the feeling that Isaac is actually alone, which is a complete 180 from the other two games. In those, it was always you by yourself, but in this title, you're constantly interacting with other people as everyone is affected by what's going on. Another mechanic I liked was the introduction of the climbing. Once you get to the snow sections of the game, you'll find yourself constantly scaling up giant mountains and walls trying to get from point A to point B. At first I didn't like this, but once I got used to the controls I ended up enjoying it. Having to navigate the rocks and other falling debris while keeping an eye out for enemies made you pay attention to everything going on around you. I thought it was cool how you could still shoot and use stasis while climbing, as it made it seem like all of this was seamless, like it wasn't actually scripted and part of the natural gameplay flow. In regards to the action, there was a lot that I don't like, which I've already stated, but there was some things that I did enjoy. Everything feeling chaotic while still maintaining a bit of horror was something that I didn't know I needed. Fighting waves upon waves of necromorphs really turned up the dial and made things even more intense than they already were. Then add in the set pieces that happened throughout the chapters, and this game's action was really well done. When things would start popping off, it was never just a little explosion here or gunfight there, everything was always large in scale. There was plenty of times I found myself in awe of what was actually going on, especially considering the fact that this game was made during the PS3 generation. Whether you were fixing something while killing necromorphs or attempting to find something while killing humans, there was never a dull moment in this game. What I was surprised was expanded upon was the space exploration. Before, you would venture into small pockets where you would have to travel using gravity to reach new areas and kill enemies, but in this game you would step out into actual space and have to travel good ways just to do the simplest of tasks. Once out here, you really felt the gravity of your situation. Being out in space just further emphasized how dangerous everything we were doing really was, but actually seeing the black void of space really pushes the idea front and center. Speaking of traveling, you're able to travel from ship to ship, which has never been done before. It's cool to hop in a small ship, pick where you want to go, and then take a small journey over there. Unfortunately, the game eventually moves away from all this space to being more on planet, but just having this feature in the game at all was a good addition. I think if this was expanded upon more, this game might have really dived into the RPG territory, as this may have prompted the devs to make more planets and add more side missions along with the main story. In regards to the side missions, I thought these weren't bad. Similar to before, these would pop up as you progress, having you do basic tasks like finding ammunition crates or discovering important lore related items. I don't think every single one is worth doing, but because of the materials problem that I mentioned earlier, it's worth doing some of these, as the rewards you receive for completing these are worthwhile. They're never hard to find either, as by simply opening the menu, clicking the mission, and then using the navigation, you can get to the objective within seconds. I think out of the 3 games, the mission system is done the best in this third entry. When looking at this gameplay in its entirety, there is both good and bad with it, but as for someone who was used to how things were done before, the changes made weren't for me. Even still, I think if you do or don't enjoy this gameplay, it's completely up to the player, because there's just too many factors to consider when judging this as a whole. The story for Dead Space 3 is actually really entertaining, but a bit confusing. In my opinion, the easiest way to put this would be to compare it to an action-packed sci-fi flick. The plot is actually interesting, but there's so much going on that it sort of masks the story. I got distracted by the overall spectacle that the story was told in instead of locking in on what actually was going on. Avoiding spoilers, but once again we play as Isaac Clarke after narrowly surviving the events of Dead Space 2. This time though, we're trying to hide and stay secluded when we are pulled out of hiding to find Ellie. Here is where the actual story begins. Right from the start, the entire vibe of this game felt different than before. Each time you always felt alone, like the necromorphs were the ones who had the upper hand and the humans were on the losing side. Like they had no control and they didn't know how all this stuff worked or why it even existed in the first place. Not in this game. The human group we encounter has clear intentions and made it known that they are well informed of the situation. They do not care about anything else except the goal and will not stop until it's finished. Unfortunately, we find ourselves in the middle of all this yet again and are forced to suit up to save the universe, a third time. I'd be lying if I said I didn't feel bad for Isaac at this point. This man didn't ask for any of the crap that's been thrown his way, but yet he comes through each and every time. What I thought this game did really well was seeing how all the events affect the other people. You're with a small group of people that accompany you during different parts of the story, and they all react to what happens in different ways. To add on to that, these same people affect Isaac as well. Just like in the previous games, other people's decisions have a direct effect on what happens to Isaac. Most of the things that happen aren't his fault, and yet he has to be the one to clean up the mess or save everyone. Even though this has always been the case, I think this was felt greater in this third entry. To my surprise, there was even some drama thrown into the story as well, as you actually get mixed into a little love triangle, with that being an underlying storyline for a large chunk of the game. The main issue I have with this story is that I think it needed to be a bit more grounded. I think the first game did a really great job in making the story layered but still easy to understand, but this game not as much. Understanding which marker is being talked about and then what the moons are and then how everything ties together might go over your head. I understand that a third game in a trilogy is going to be a bit complex in terms of plot, but I think for this universe, maybe condensing everything some could have been a good idea. Since this game had a larger cast than before, I wasn't sure if I would actually care about them, but to my surprise I did. As we meet certain people people in the beginning, seeing what happens to each character by the end was a nice reward for the small amount of character building that was done in the early chapters. There was plenty of times I was wondering what was going to happen to someone else that wasn't Isaac, or when another character made a decision that I gave him a side eye for. The inclusion of all the support characters in most of these scenes will make you pay attention to them more than you might think. Of course, your main focus will probably be on Isaac and Ellie, but as time goes on, you might start caring about the other members a lot more than you're expecting. And for this to be the only game they're included in, that's pretty impressive. I thought the pacing for this game was decent. It starts out slow with us trying to figure out what Isaac has been up to and understanding the situation, but quickly we're thrust into the human group and their plans. As we try to stop the Necromorphs once and for all, the story's a lot of highs and lows, kinda like a roller coaster, which for an action game I'm 100% okay with. The action was so unrelenting at times that sometimes I needed a second to catch my breath, but considering this was the first time this series went in that direction, I didn't find that to be a huge flaw. When you consider the DLC as well, the story in Dead Space 3 leaves us in a state of uncertainty. There's some questions that still need to be answered, and more importantly, there's a lot of meat left on the bone to tell more story. If you're into fast-paced action with some sci-fi elements and drama thrown in there too, then this story is definitely for you. Overall, I'm torn on Dead Space 3. I have so many issues with the gameplay, but the gameplay in its entirety is still fun. I don't know why the team decided to change up so much of what I enjoyed about the previous two games. I'm going to assume this is because of EA and their involvement, maybe forcing them to change the game's identity into something that it never was. Even still, I think Visceral Games did the best they could and created a game that deserves a playthrough. For those reasons, I want to give this game a 7.5. This game is by no means garbage, but it could have been just as good as the other two games. I understand that changing things and evolving is necessary in the gaming industry, but doing it for this game just wasn't the right call. Again, I'm assuming this drastic shift was due to low game sales from Dead Space 2, but I think improving upon what was already there could have done wonders for this franchise. To put it simply, it's not to change the action that hurts this game, it's all the other tweaks within the core gameplay to appease that change is where the title is affected. Unfortunately, we're not getting a remake of Dead Space 2 or a Dead Space 4, so this may be the last mainline title in this franchise for a long time. In my opinion, I think rebooting this series and keeping it grounded so anybody can jump in at any time would be the best way at reviving this series, but only time will tell as EA probably won't greenlight such an idea. What did you think about Dead Space 3? Did you enjoy this more than the other two games, or are you hearing about this for the first time? Let me know in the comment section below, and if you enjoyed this video, feel free to watch one of my other reviews right here.